Hello, everyone. My name is Naja Abdulkawi. I am the Arts and Culture Director for Muslim Sisters of Staten Island, as well as the con leader for Geek Out at Staten Island. And we have an amazing plethora of intelligent people, at least I think they're intelligent, here to speak to you for our Black and Asian Solidarity Part 2 conversation for It's Taboo, Let's Talk, and thankfully supported by ONA. So I will quickly bring it over to Sylvia because I want to hear her say some cool things.
Yeah, thank you, Naja, for inviting all of us here today. And I'm really glad that we are able to collaborate on this event. My name is Sylvia, and I'm representing the Asian American Federation. And we're really able to pull this event together and have this collaboration because of the Office of New Americans. It is a New York State Department program that really aims to elevate the needs of low-income immigrants. And I think a big part of it is just that, a lot of times some of us come from immigrant families, and despite living in such a diverse environment, a lot of our immigrant communities can become very insular in their community needs. And I think as this last year, which we're finally talking about some of the dynamics that do affect all of our communities, it's very important to make sure that we bring this conversation to the communities that sometimes don't get to talk about these things, and for us to really collectively process some of the violence that's experienced, but also how we can create generative spaces out of it. So yeah, I'm really glad to have a list of panelists here today with us to have this conversation. And to start it off, it would be great if, Naja, if you want to kind of introduce some of the people we have here with us today.
Sure. So I said a little bit about myself, but a little bit more about me. I'm a very big advocate for mental health and health resources. I went to school for art therapy. That's my jam. I also do a lot of stuff actively in the community, whether it's protesting, advocacy, different things like that. And I love dinosaurs. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm also very creative. I do poetry and open mics and whatnot, but this isn't about me. This is about the rest of the people on the screen. So just to tell you a little bit about some more people we have here, we have Billy Kim. Billy is the director of communications of 180 Church, a non-denominational church in downtown Manhattan, a church that is predominantly Gen Y and Gen Z. So looking at y'all. He also serves as a chaplain at NYU and leads the 180 Fellowship on the campus of NYU, which integrates the importance of mental health and faith. So if you want to say hello first really quickly, Billy Kim.
Hello.
Happy
to be here. I'm really happy to be here again.
Thank you, Billy Kim. I love the little wait, let me unmute myself. Next, we have Stephanie Loreno. Stephanie Loreno is an Afro-Latinx woman who has a strong passion for spreading mental health awareness through the vehicle of art, so a little bit like myself with art therapy. Stephanie also is a recent graduate with her master's in art therapy, and she believes in the way that art can heal and tell stories regarding people's culture, community, and their life. So Stephanie Loreno, if you want to introduce yourself and say hello.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hi. And next on my end, I will introduce Cheyenne Clarity. Cheyenne Clarity is like my right-hand man woman, because I would say right-hand man, but never right-hand woman. She is also an advocate for mental health. She has been for like 8 years plus been an advocate for us. She goes to protests. She does a lot of research in that area. She's also done research on cultural competency, as well as talked about mental health and faith. She is also has her master's in global psychology. So say hello, Cheyenne. Oh, sorry, there's a slight delay, just to let you guys know.
Hi.
All right, I'm going to pass it off to Sylvia to introduce the rest of our guests.
Thank you. And then the next we have Miriam Yu. She's a Korean American artist based in New York, and she creates illustrations, designs, short comics based on her life experiences and social issues. She also sells merchandises based on her art to raise money for fundraisers and humanitarian related organizations. And you can say hi, Miriam.
Hey, everyone. What's up?
And then we have Edward Fan, who's worked on film productions such as If Beale Street Could Talk and Late Night. and worked in the development department of Pearl Studio, an animation production company. And currently, he is a graduate MFA student at USC for film production. Nice meeting you, Edward.
Nice meeting you guys. Happy to be here.
Yeah. And then lastly, I'm just going to reintroduce myself a little bit. My name is Sylvia, and I am the Immigrant Community Navigator at the Asian American Federation. And for those of y'all who don't really know about the Asian American Federation, we're a leadership organization that serves pretty much the low-income immigrant community, Asian immigrant community of New York City. And we are in partnership with over 70 partner and member organizations that do great work on the ground. And a lot of what we do is research and advocacy and making sure that the needs of our communities elevated. And recently, we've been focusing a lot of our efforts on trying to create resources and also raise awareness to the fact that anti-Asian hate has been affecting our community, and just making sure and holding, stakeholders accountable to make sure that we create resources to help people when they do experience these violence incidents and being able to find help. So that's a little bit of everything. And before we get into it, we would love to introduce some of the ground rules to set up this space as a place for discussion. And the first thing is just that we're going to make sure we respect one another when we have this conversation. Another one is just using I statements and not overly generalizing when you talk. And then third one being just being acknowledging impact, but assume best intention when we're having this conversation. And lastly, take care of yourselves. If you need to turn off your screen at any moment, please do so. And, if you need to walk away, no worries. But with all that, Nadja, you can get us started with the first question.
All right. Thank you again for the lovely introductions. And again, I'm going to say it probably throughout the whole time. Thank you to our lovely panelists for taking out the time to talk about this conversation, because we have these conversations all the time, but not necessarily on screen. And it's important that people know that these conversations are being had, not just when it's in the news, but all the time. So the first question that we have here for our audience members, and if you guys come up with questions along the way, please put them in the comment section. We can bring it up at the end for further Q&A. The first question is, growing up, what was your exposure to Black and Asian communities and history? So I'm going to bring it over to Billy Kim.
Hi, guys. It's good to be back again. For those who don't know me, and this will integrate with the question, I grew up in Staten Island. And so for those who are not familiar, we are the Forgotten Borough, but there's actually a fairly big Korean immigrant community there. So it's big enough, it's small enough, it's pretty big, but it's small enough where pretty much most Koreans kind of know each other. So for me, growing up in Staten Island, I was actually isolated within the Korean community. And I think if anybody had met Koreans before, personally for me, in my experience, we got some real pride. So like they made sure to have after school programs for us to make sure we know our history. And in addition, every time at dinner, my dad would share a story about where we came from, my legacy, why it's important to be Korean, and how you should be proud of that and find dignity in that. It wasn't until public school that it pretty much expanded my exposure to a bigger Asian community, where I met a lot of Chinese, Filipinos, and even some Japanese, as well as, other POC communities and the Black community. But in terms of learning the history and the culture, once again, that was actually formed by public school, movies, and that was quite actually very limited. Eventually in the college, I got to learn more, but to be honest with you, it wasn't until this pandemic where Black Lives Matter and anti-Asian hate, I actually personally took it more seriously and dug into more literature.
Thank you so much, Billy, for answering that question. Now I will move it down to Stephanie.
Same question? Okay, so I can relate very much to what Billy was saying, in the sense that the importance of a diverse population in school. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, so the area itself is very diverse, and I can say that I went to school with a lot of different people of color, including an Asian population, and personally I identify as Afro-Latinx, so Spanish and Black children were all intermingling, and I believe that much of my understanding of my community also came from the stories of my family as well. I think that's where we get to know ourselves the best, is from the eyes of people who've have had lived experiences for a long time. So, and I guess in lieu of that question, I wish maybe there was more opportunities, within the school system, to understand those cultures better, because even though we're all together, sometimes there's opportunities where we don't get to discuss our differences and understand other people's cultural background. But I want to say too that my exposure to those other communities, let's say the Asian community, also came from my personal interests of music and YouTube. And I guess I'm calling myself out there, but I ventured down YouTube, and I love K-pop and anime, so that's that's where my exposure came from as well. So I love culture, and I think that's the love of understanding other people is where that comes from.
Right. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And there's another part to this question, so I'm going to give that to the other half of the group, which is, what are some spaces that allow you to learn about marginalized communities and histories? So I'm going to pass that to you, Miriam.
For me, some spaces, I think for me, definitely was for me, public schools, because for my schooling, I went to a lot of it was pretty diverse actually, and especially since I went to high school in Port Richmond in Staten Island, so yeah, in terms of the Black community, there's a good amount of that too, and also with the school, actually I had a teacher, and she taught us a lot about different history in different parts of the world too, which actually she didn't actually teach us through the textbooks, but she actually printed out different articles and taught us that, and it was kind of taboo for her to talk about these kind of things actually, and so that was actually a good space for me to actually understand more about that. And especially for me, I'm a total internet nerd in that way, so I think the internet community helped me to expose different communities around me, and actually also with history too, there's so many resources. If you Google anything, you could just find, Wikipedia has every history you want to look up at. So and also for me too, YouTube was a big thing too. A lot of YouTube videos, I would just watch different stuff about Asian American history or Black history, and it's just yeah, I think internet was a big thing for me.
Okay, cool, awesome. And I feel like some of the audience members, with what has been said so far, might relate with what you guys are saying. I'm going to pass it off to Cheyenne. Again, reminder, guys, it might be a little bit of delay.
Yeah, so can everyone hear me? Just testing. Yep. Awesome. So for me, I'm a full-blown nerd, so I love learning about cultures and just getting to know people. So one of the spaces that I truly got to be more immersed in was actually activism groups in college. So getting to know people, getting to actually meet them based off of their different backgrounds, talking about similar issues, because obviously we're all under one particular cause or causes, which actually kind of helped me get to know some of the people that I still talk to this day. But I guess where I was mostly immersed into really speaking to people of the Asian American community was towards college, and even during the anti-Asian hate, where I actually got to speak to people like, Miriam, Billy, and Edward about different issues, whether, most of us don't really speak unless we're virtually. But the times where, like myself, Billy, and Miriam have spoken in person, we've spoke deeply about various issues from not just my perspective, but also from their perspective. So yeah, internet, like Miriam and what everybody else has been saying has been a true, like, factor in me getting to learn more about the communities, but also a lot of reading and a lot of, like, having to learn about it myself and what I had to unteach myself about some of the history or the lack thereof that was taught.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And now I'm gonna hit you with like both of the questions, Edward. I'm gonna do a double whammy for both of them. So just to remind you what the first question was, as well as for the audience, growing up, what were your exposure to Black and Asian communities in history? And then to follow up with that again, where are some places that allow you to learn about marginalized communities and histories?
Thank you. I feel so lucky that I get to answer both parts. So I grew up kind of all over the world. I didn't come to the United States until I was 10. And so before that, I was in China. And in China, I didn't really learn much about any other community except Chinese community. But coming to the United States, I now realize how much of a failure that public education system was in helping us learn about other communities besides, you have like a chapter on an Asian immigrant community, and then you have maybe 2 chapters on antebellum history, but yeah, not much of anything else. And I don't think it was until like college and post-college that I really start to lean into that piece of history that was missing in my education. I think a lot of, growing up, I think media, like everybody else, the internet, really exposed me to different cultures. I think subconsciously I was always seeking media that featured underrepresented minorities, just because even seeing somebody who wasn't Asian but wasn't white either felt refreshing. And that was really nice. And I think literature for sure. I remember the first time I read The Fire Next Time, it completely just blew me away. It changed my life. It changed my entire worldview. And I just kind of got sucked into that entire topic. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Wow. You guys have such like interesting perspectives. I love hearing it. I'm sure the audience does too. So I will give now the reins to Sylvia for the next question.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel like hearing that is just seeing how, for a lot of us, where we learned about these histories, it's not really in history class or in a classroom in general, which I also resonate very hard with. And yeah, I think it really speaks to the failure, like Edward said, of our public school system. So moving on to a little bit of a heavier question. The question is kind of looking at, during the pandemic, we saw mainstream news media paying attention to the violence experienced by both Black and Asian communities, which led to many people speaking out about injustices. While not always the case, we saw also instances of both communities choosing to be silent when it came to their own anti-Asian or anti-Black rhetoric. What are some underlying causes of their silence? And since it's a heavy question, I'm just going to let anyone who feels compelled to jump in and get the conversation started.
I guess I can start this one. An observation that I've noticed is that as a person of color, a lot of us are seen as active participants in our abuse. So therefore, a lot of us are compelled to speak out about it because this has been a societal issue for centuries, really. So when you look back during the Chinese Exclusion Act, when you look at the Rodney King riots and in the 1990s, when you have these different periods of time where you see that we've had a history of abuse, it often kind of shows that some people are willing to speak out, but others that most voices will often be streamed in the media that were silenced. And a big role that I've noticed is that the media plays a role in how we are portrayed and how, whether we are speaking about it or not, or they purposely will choose people who won't speak out about it. because it makes it seem as if this is a non-issue. But like a small percentage of us would rather, not talk about it when there's plenty of us that have and do speak about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Cheyenne. And I saw that Edward rose his hand too. Is there anything you want to add on?
Well, I completely agree with what Cheyenne said, and I think I just going back to earlier, we discussed the failure of the public education system. I think a lot of people just don't have the words, they don't have the context to know how to talk about these things, and also culturally, I think, I mean, speaking for myself, within the Chinese culture, it's because we come from a history of war and violence. Speaking out and being active politically is very a taboo thing. I remember, like, as a kid, even when we were in our own rooms and houses, if we were talking about anything remotely politically relevant, my parents and grandparents would just start whispering. And so just the idea for them that, you want to put yourself out there was very scary. And I think that bleeds into the later generations. And I think also, like, just going back to the conflict, the historical conflicts between the two communities. I was talking to a friend who grew up in Atlanta, and he was talking to me about how there's a lot of reluctance within the Black community in Atlanta to speak out against anti-Asian hate because, at least for him, the conflicts that his community had with the Korean immigrant community was still very relevant and strong, and there was still a lot of tension there that makes it difficult for either communities to really feel like they can speak out. And I think most people that do speak out have a wider understanding of the problem within the context of, like, white supremacy and all that. That most people just don't have the opportunity to learn about these things.
Yeah, I think this really reminds me of the fact that a lot of times when it comes to, let's say, resources for low-income immigrants, like, it's already, like, limited. And when you are in a society where there's limited resources, it's hard to see, others as, I guess, allies, more of just trying to get a piece of that pie. So I can see how that really affects maybe the lived experiences of some communities out there. And adding on to that, a follow-up question is, like, how has the model minority myth or things like that, similar, I guess, phenomenons contributed to anti-Blackness? Or if in the Black communities, you guys see other, myths in your community that contributes to, like, anti-Asian sentiments?
I want to go into that, and maybe Miriam, you could relate us as Korean immigrants or parents of Korean immigrants, and Edward, you shared it. There is with the model minority myth, there is a clear contrast where the Black and Asian communities are pitted against each other. Cheyenne brought it up with the Rodney King riots and the LA riots in the 1990s, where it's clear the socioeconomic factors that created a wedge between the communities. Personally, for me, my parents owned a deli, and they came from middle to high, upper middle class family, immigrated to the U.S. to try to make a better life, right? Because it's the American dream. But to be honest, the only real estate they could get was actually low income areas that were predominantly Black, and they didn't live in the communities. They felt that it was very unsafe, and obviously, as a result, the communities that these Korean immigrant delis and laundromats, all this stuff, because they didn't really live there or understand, the communities felt exploited. And the only exposure, especially having conversations with my parents, that they had was criminal activities, and because of that, that colored in their experiences. They didn't see anything beyond that. And so they're just like, oh, Black people are criminals. Black people, they just take and steal. They exploit. And then you create these stereotypes. And these stereotypes are passed down to us who are second or third or fourth generation. And so I could definitely see, as Edward shared about his friend from Atlanta, why there's such a rift. And those conversations never get addressed or talked about, because even though us personally, for me, like I have a broader view, but we don't like to, talk about the elephant in the room because it's uncomfortable and it's hard and it brings up pain and confusion, and there's some stuff that we don't want to admit, and I think that's what's hard. But again, that's why I love to be here, and that I'm so happy that we're doing this.
I want to chime in a little because I agree with Billy and what Cheyenne and everybody said. Like, it is hard talking about the elephant in the room, even though it takes up so much space. The elephant is uncomfortable. It smells. It's very clear that it's there. But I think it's kind of a similar concept, even like metaphorically or even literally. Like, if an elephant is in a room that you're in, you're going to be very cautious, right? Around that elephant. You're going to be very cautious about how you move, not to scare the elephant, because the elephant might just, we have this idea that this elephant's going to crush us, right? This whole thing is going to crush us. It's going to ruin the family. It's going to ruin a friendship. It's going to ruin potential whatever, right? And I think that's the unfortunate power of myths and stereotypes, right? Is that they are a literal elephant that we see as being like dangerous and so taking up so much space and doesn't really allow us to make space for ourselves to grow past the elephant, to realize the elephant is actually more afraid of us than we are of them, and I do believe that because like for myself, I have had a similar thing where like I didn't really grow up around like a lot of different people for like a small part of my life. And then I grew up with a lot of people who were Desi, Arab, Asian. Once I got into like junior high school, different things like that. Like, Stephanie, I'm also into K-pop and anime and all that other stuff. However, there's also a difference between being interested in a culture and then thinking that, taking advantage and appropriating all those things. And I'm sure that's going to be part of our conversation later, but stereotypes and myths sometimes people think of as being positive, right? Like, oh, well, everybody thinks you're smart because you're an Asian. Like, I hate that, or everybody thinks you can dance because you're Black. Like, no, I am the rhythmless nation and I proudly say it, right? So it's like sometimes positive stereotypes in my mind, personally, there's not a positive one because you're only seen as being that and nothing more. So that really limits you, and how positive can that be? So that was just my chime in for that.
I kind of wanted to mention a little bit, like, just in terms of the modern minority, for me personally, like, I think there's like a whole thing in terms of the stereotype for Asian people. It's like we had to be silent, and going back to the previous topic before too, like the silence of that too, like when during these like anti-Asian hate, even with what was going on with the Black community, with the BLM, like I try to speak up and talk about these kind of issues, especially with racism. And it's a real thing. And when I was talking about, mostly with my family members, like they're super quiet about it. They're like, "Why are you talking about Miriam?" Like they don't want to talk about any of it. And part of that silence was like, I think it's a lot of back in history too. It's like the silence kind of protected us, to be silent. Like you don't cause that trouble or a scene, like, and when we talk about these things, we're gonna bring up a lot of different stuff. It's super uncomfortable. I feel like these conflicts we need to kind of talk about it, because it's like all these things, it is uncomfortable. It's gonna, I think we need to like cause some scene of this, because it's like this thing where I think for me being Asian American, just I don't really know how to deal with conflicts in general. Like, I wasn't really taught, and because of, especially since of the anti-Asian hate, like there's a lot of silence. And I thought it was interesting more in even with our Asian American community, there wasn't a lot of people who weren't really talking about it. And that's why even from my art, that's why I posted more with my art. Like I realized in terms of that, like I have a voice to talk about it. We need to speak up for our Asian, especially our elders that were being attacked. And especially during that time, apparently there's a lot of instances where our elders were being attacked, and they didn't report it because they didn't want to cause any scene. They don't want to trouble people, in a lot of different cases too. But, I think it's just like this thing where it's a culture we weren't really taught even with that. And it stems in that too. And I think being American, it just helped me to realize I can speak up, I can talk more. And I think going to Korea too, it's like a lot of it's just like I think like the government has a lot control in different ways, and to talk and have that freedom of speech wasn't really there. So yeah, like yeah, going back to the whole thing, I realized for me too, as being like Asian American, it's like it was interesting too. It's like a journey for myself as my identity of who I am. Like I had to really navigate through that and then kind of relearn different things, and had to like I had to unlearn a lot of different things that were taught to me to be silent. I can't be silent in these moments where like our people are being attacked. It's like literally we need to do something about it. And I realized I also like if we don't talk about it for our own communities, like who else going to talk about it? It's people that don't know. People that don't have information or never experienced that for themselves. And these are people that would be talking for us. But I was just like, because you guys don't know who we are, only like I feel like we ourselves know ourselves better, right? And just also mentioning during this, also like I appreciate also during the time of like I've been being more active in the activist group, going to more protests. Actually, for a lot of the different protests for the anti-Asian hate, like I noticed a lot of people from the POC community, they actually helped start that for us too. So like I like that's also that's I think that's really powerful for me to see. It's like that alliance of like everyone needs to come together as a community, because like even for I think for a lot of the Asian American community, like we didn't really know how to go about with it a lot too. Yeah, that's my chime at this.
Yeah. And before Stephanie answers, I'm going to kind of add another aspect to this question. And I think it really ties into a lot of things Mariam was saying about having to work on yourself to unlearn a lot of the, myths that you were taught. And I think it's another elephant in the room is just kind of how white supremacy plays a role in all this. And, before moving forward, I would love to hear like, how do we define whiteness, and in what ways does whiteness contribute to internalized racism within all our communities? Heavy question, Stephanie. Feel free to answer that or anything we talked about before.
Well, I think from what I'm taking from the discussion is that we all want to be recognized as multifaceted individuals, that we have the capacity to be the people we want to be outside of what people put on us. Because when someone has an expectation of us, it really conflicts with how we see ourselves too. And, maybe we all acknowledge that we care about each other, and that when we place upon ourselves an expectation on someone else, we can't really put the importance of empathizing with someone else, because we put those barriers between each other. I know that we could list off several different stereotypes that have been placed upon us, but it's never something we place upon ourselves, because we walk around in this world knowing that, hey, I'm Stephanie, that's Naja, Billy, Sylvia, Miriam, Edward, Cheyenne. And I think what we're doing now is like the evidence that we want to be able to combat those myths and those stereotypes, because we should be able to speak on our behalf and behalf of people that look like us, because we have our communities, and that is what makes us feel whole too, being a part of something that fulfills us, that makes us a part of our identity. I guess in response to how do you define whiteness, or how does whiteness contribute to the internalized racism with all the communities, is that it seems like an outside perspective is telling us who we should be and how we should treat each other. And that pushes us apart, because often, like I said before, like those stereotypes were never really something we view ourselves as. I don't think that our own separate communities have those, like, I think stereotypes have that connotation of being negative. We wouldn't be negative about ourselves. It seems like someone else is trying to diminish our higher self-esteem and what we bring, because I think that each community can uplift each other. And when someone is oppressing us, that is the opportunity to come together and determine that a plan. And for me personally, I have had trying to find the term, when someone says something to you like, oh, and to the effect of like, because I identify as Latina and Black, when someone tells me, oh, you're not like that kind of stereotype that I thought you were going to be, that's a backhanded compliment. It tells you that they didn't have high standards for you in the beginning. And that's hurtful. And I think that's what I determined whiteness as, that someone is making a judgment on who I am based off of things that I didn't predetermine. And it does affect our safety and our security, because I don't think that people have the predisposition to hurt each other, but it's so much more like we're fueled by all this feeling of, I don't know, that we should attack one another, that I think it gets in the way of us trying to understand each other in our different ways that we have in common. I hope that makes sense. I know I'm saying a lot of overgeneralized ideas, but I think personally, during the Black Lives Matter and anti-Asian hate, I think it was an opportunity to see that we both have an outsider or an outside perspective make us feel insecure and unsafe. And so that we can have that commonality, and we should do something about it, like such as these conversations. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
Edward, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk about this phrase that I remember reading about, which was, I read it somewhere that said, somebody said, in the future, we won't need white people for white supremacy to persist. Which I think about this phrase when I think about kind of what maybe China is doing, like the Chinese relations with African countries right now, where essentially they're like colonizing a lot of the African countries and creating this rift between Asian and Black communities, and which makes me really nervous about like the future of Asian Black relations. Not only because it feels so much larger than us, but also because there's so much internalizing of whiteness within those geopolitical actions. And yeah, I guess when I think about like in what ways does whiteness contribute to internalized racism, it's really hard to separate whiteness from the native culture, like how do you, because whiteness has been seeped into the Asian history in so many different ways for such a long time, and in the history of the entire world, so that I guess like whiteness, I guess can mean the need to dominate, to be superior to another community. But I'm interested also the ways in which the media propagates these ideas, especially as someone who's an aspiring filmmaker and studying film right now. It's really interesting to just see what kind of systems are in place for racist media to still continue to be disseminated. Even going to USC, I see very clearly how professors are crafting systems, educational systems that are still contributing to westernized white forms of storytelling that unless you actively fight against it and risk maybe your career or your grade or whatever, your life, then these systems will continue to perpetuate. And yeah, that's what I want to say.
Can I add one more thing? Because you just, like an idea and thought process just got sparked with you talking, Edward, like about like the media and everything like that. But also it makes me just go back to the idea of perception that Stephanie was also talking about too. Where for me, the way I see it, like internalized racism when it comes down to like whiteness is the idea that like the lighter you are, the closer you're to being stereotypically white, the better you are, right? Or the more powerful you are, the more money that you make, which is the idea and concept of being successful, which causes, I think, that internalized racism as well. Because it's like you're not as successful because you're darker, you don't have straight hair, your hair isn't blonde, really going super stereotypical white, right? You don't have all these things that, is really attributed to whiteness, but it's also gone hand in hand to equal success. And I think too, in talking specifically about like the Black community, we think being lighter means that you are more attractive as well, right? That you are more likely to get a better job or get a better, or, you know, be with a partner that's also very attractive or have really nice, this idea of like having like mixed children, right? So it's like, oh, well, it's better if you're with a white person than with someone who's Black or Asian or whatever, because your kids will, look better or have better features. So it's also, I think, to compound on that, because I know we have to go to the next question, about the idea of like safety too, right? Because if you're someone who can be considered, let's say, racially ambiguous, right, and have something that makes you look more quote unquote white, in that way you're seen as being safer, or safer to talk to about certain things, or safer to hang out around, or less likely to be harassed for certain things that people who come from that community, have to deal with, because you don't necessarily look stereotypically like members of that community. So that also can cause a lot of internalized like hate and, anguish towards each other, because it's like, oh, look at that, blah, 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 or look at that light skinned person, think that they're better than me, right? I've heard that a lot of times from other people, oh, look at this person with straight hair, they think they're better than me. Look at this person with this, but it's all around the concept of being white, right? And it's like, oh, well, you don't have to worry about these things. You're fine because your skin is lighter, or your hair is straighter, or your eyes, or whatever, right? So it's that idea that you are safer than me because you have these features, which is thought of as being more acceptable or more or okay to be around, can cause someone to be potentially angry or jealous or upset, which can cause, that colorism issue, as well as in more of an internalized racism issue. So that was like my chime. But while I'm talking, I guess I should talk about the next question. Or you had another one for this one, right, Sylvia? Or am I skipping?
No, that's it. I'm going to hand it off to you.
Because I was like, man, did I skip myself? Okay, so the next question, also here's a little backstory before I ask it. So the national conversation now has focused more about attacks, more about attacks happening, right? So some people in our community are calling more police, whereas some are causing like caution against it. So what are some solutions that you guys can think of, in essence of like what would mean for people being safe? Because some people are thinking about it as like a safety precaution, and some people are thinking about it as like, no, we have to call the police because this and this is happening. So we kind of talked about it a little bit before, but just to kind of go into it a bit more. So whoever wants to hop on board, or else I'm going to pick you guys like they do in class.
So
Yeah.
I'll go for this question. So the thing is, I see it as there needs to be more resources for social programs. So whether if it's social workers, mental health counselors, substance abuse, anything that would involve a greater good of having other, I guess, professions to be able to fulfill in certain problems where there's a grayer area, where it's calling the police is a Black or white situation, where you do not necessarily know how the situation is going to turn out, especially if you don't speak English. A lot of English is not the official language of the US. However, that there are people who speak multiple languages, which can put us in a line of fire, an active participant in our abuse, or nothing can happen. So anything can happen in these situations depending on what's going on. And so with the concept of safety, there needs to be some type of budgeting that are for specific type of group and programs, because one of the things that they talked about with these attacks are the assailants are often people who are mentally ill. Now, if this is apparently an issue, and this is something that's often talked about, then there needs to be something that needs to be done in terms of having that accessibility to mental health resources, to housing, if many of them are homeless or whatever it is. So I guess that's my 2 cents based off of what I would say.
I would agree. I think that when you look at cases where the police do arrive on the scene and it is someone that is going through a predicament that is more inclined to mental health. They don't have the training or the capability to understand what is actually happening. And I think that from personal experience, being in a psych ward, you can see that the many of those patients are brought into that environment in handcuffs by the police, which can be often traumatic. So I think it's correct in saying that there should be more resources and knowledge surrounding all these distressing situations, because personally, I know that my mother speaks Spanish and she does not feel safe in interacting with the local police in the area that we reside in, because I don't think she doesn't believe that the language barrier would actually aid her in describing her urgency, her need, and her safety. And also, I guess when we discuss like the media as well, there is that portrayal that they aren't really a force that is there to protect all communities in the same fashion or manner. So for me, from what I'm hearing, Cheyenne, is that there's a need or an increase in diversity and knowledge and people in those resources, in those environments, because then there is that sense of I guess you can relate to someone or understand someone better when you understand a situation more. I also believe that there should be more emphasis on the understanding of mental health so that we can address those larger issues, because maybe those attacks are just a small part of what is actually happening in that person. And it doesn't wash away or erase the fact that those attacks are wrong, but it's the idea that we need more preventative or interventions in place so those things don't happen. And I believe it starts with mental health.
To jump on that, oh man, speaking for the not all of the Asian community, but I'm in a unique space because I'm a pastor. So the intersection between religion and authority and law enforcement, we have, as many of you know, it's a positive relationship. Added to the layer of the Asian community, we are specifically religious Asian communities. We like police. They make us feel safe. Personally, for me, more often than not, I felt like they looked out for me in my personal experience. You know, I have a court officer in my church who is one of my best friends, and most of my experiences, more often than not, were incredibly kind and generous. Like, I remember I was arrested for a suspended license, and they knew I was a pastor, and they were incredibly kind. They fed me when I was in the cell and all that kind of stuff. And I know that's a very different experience from, you know, the Black and other POC communities. But with that said, specifically in New York City, I agree with you guys 100%, because the common denominator is, you know, a lot of these attacks are mentally ill. But then again, a lot of the older generation, especially my parents, when I talk to them, they're like, oh, look at that, they're Black. Oh, look at that. See, they're attacking us. And it goes back to the hurt and the pain of the history in the past and the stereotypes that were bled in. And, you know, many Asian communities, especially first generation, they don't really believe in mental health. They don't know what depression is. You know what I mean? They're like, you know, just get over it. You got to fight through, because, you know, their whole life was about survival. So it totally makes sense. And so the way I see it is not only on, you know, in our policies, but also in our own communities. We have to help them understand that layer, because if they don't understand the layer, they can be like, they're just gonna be like, whatever, you know, and go within their own thoughts, their own ways, their own perspective. So not only adding to policy, I think information and being educated within our communities and where they're coming from and where they've been is also an added layer to that. So, because that contributes to that safety, especially because I know statistically that even there's a rising gun ownership within the Asian of the Asian community because of these the rising crimes that are happening. So that's an interesting thought as well.
Can I say something? I'm kind of like interesting piece because like I have a different perspective of policing. A little different because in terms of I guess one example is like with my, especially seeing my mom, and she's an immigrant parent. So she would, like, especially when it comes to driving, she would get a lot of tickets. And a lot of times she would get pulled over by the cops. And a lot of times, like what I've seen for me personally, she can't speak English that well. So there'll be a lot of conflicts of like dialogue with the with polices, and a lot of times they would be really aggressive with her, and they wouldn't be empathize for her and what she's saying, and there's a lot of disrespect. I'm gonna say, and not only with like policing, but even generally, I noticed different systems of for immigrant people. Not a lot of people have patience to have dialogues, proper dialogues, have conversations, and like there like it's like a lot of, I think it's a lot of cultural things. Sometimes when the people raise up their voices, they think, oh, they're being disrespectful and rude. She's not trying to be disrespectful or rude, it's just the way of her tone of her voice. And because of that, people like misinterpret a lot of different things. And yeah, it's just really heartbreaking when I see that with my mom, like when I can't be there for her, and they're yelling at her, not really meeting her where she's at, not seeing her as a human being in a way too, Ashley. So I think for me, it's just I think it'd be nice to just have this like in terms of for immigrant people, just to have a more understanding, compassion, for just like having conversations with them, and just also to be patient with them too. Just like not be like too fast with like, oh, like just when they can't be when they can't understand what they're saying, like I noticed that they get irritated really easily. Just have a little like just calm down and just see what they're trying to say. And another thing too, I don't know, for also the anti-Asian hate, there's a lot of things that you see in the videos too, like people that get attacked, especially the Asian elderly people that get attacked, and you see like people, there's like that bystander mentality where people don't do anything, and there's a lot of people and they don't intervene, do anything about it. So I think it would be nice in terms of how I feel in terms of community, is just like have our neighbors, like get to know everyone around us too, like be I think it's the kind of thing even for every individual as a person, like really be involved in our own communities where we live in physically too, because it's important for everyone to like unfortunately, that's the thing. It's also police, like they can't like that's a lot of times I notice with police is too, like they're there also to be like to help out and to make sure everyone's safe, but there's times where they can't get there in time, especially being in Manhattan. I work there in Manhattan. Like there's times where I work in a coffee shop, and there's times we had to call in cases where the police need to intervene, but there's times where they can't get there in time. So there's a lot of cases with that too. And I there's actually one incident with me where someone actually verbally like tried to assault me in different ways, and that I noticed we didn't have time to call the police, but what actually had happened with me was that someone, an actual customer around me, like helped me out and intervened and helped me, and actually because of that that person that was like like abusive and all that, like he left. So she actually helped me out a lot, and I was like a random stranger. So I think in terms of even with this, like I think everyone can contribute in a way to like help out and stand up when we see these things happen, like injustices or some messed up thing happen. Obviously we should do something about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and to add in on that, really, I feel like you touched on a lot of aspects of why like policing many of the times, not all the times, doesn't necessarily lead to like a good resolution or safety for victims of anti-Asian hate. I mean, I get a lot of calls from people trying to reach for help, and a lot of them do contact the police, but then they experience everything that Marion kind of mentioned of like misinterpretation. And then another issue right now is that the city really don't have that many resources available and recourses that can be done to people, especially who suffer from like verbal abuse and discrimination in that sense. And a lot of the cases, unfortunately, I think physical assault cases actually have been on the rise, which is very disturbing, but still a majority of the cases are like verbal. So like being able to provide like victim services that are more comprehensive, mental health resources, spaces for people to process, spaces for people to feel supported, and just having like outward facing, let's say like city resource people to acknowledge that, yes, what you experience is awful and it's wrong. And I've gotten calls before where people have called a bajillion different lines, and I'm the first person who tell them, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And that's really upsetting, because it's like, a gaslighting of saying that the kind of discrimination you face is not significant enough to be considered an issue and like to be neglected. And sorry, just one more thing to add. The Asian American Federation has actually been doing a series of like upstander trainings and physical self-defense trainings, really trying to equip community members and being able to be good bystanders, and also like really trying to quell some of the anxieties that we especially see in elders in our community, because we see so many people that are literally choosing not to leave their house anymore because they just don't think that they feel safe about it. And I just put a link in the chat. Maybe Naja, if you can share with the Facebook chat. It is a training we're doing that's upcoming, that's going to be in person. And this is kind of the beginning, a launchpad program that we're trying to expand, eventually safety ambassador programs across neighborhoods, where we're kind of having people be there to provide, you know, upstander support and just like spread resources and like call people out when and de-escalate situations within their own community. So if anybody, you know, listening here, or even people on the panel, if y'all would like to join and learn more about like what this program could look like, feel free to join us next week. I think it's next Thursday at night. But yeah, that's just some of the beginning resources that at least the Federation is trying to create to address some of this lack of support that people may feel in this situation. But I know, like, I don't know if Edward want to add anything else. We can also go on to the next question. It can really, based on where people want to go with this.
I just one quick thought I had, which was I remember reading a lot of articles that pointed out how I think the majority of the anti-Asian hate incidents came from white people, and despite the marketability of those viral videos that showed Black people attacking Asian people, I think we really have to be more strict and vigilant with mainstream media and how they are framing all these incidents, and to not let them keep on pitting our communities against each other.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's something that it's so important as, you know, youth in our community to make sure we educate our family members on knowing that like what you see on TV and those really alarming news, like you shouldn't, even if, you know, these incidents do happen, you should never take one single incident to overgeneralize the whole group of people, because that's exactly what caused these incidents to begin with. And I think making sure that we kind of display that logic is super important. But yeah, so to move on to a more lighter question is just what has been important to build strong cross-racial solidarity in your community? This could look like neighborhoods or in boroughs and workplaces, and it could be things that you've done or you've seen, or things that you're like, hey, we should do that. This would be great. So yeah, any of y'all can get started.
I think one thing that has left an impression on me, I worked for a nonprofit for a brief amount of time, and they had anti-racism training where they brought on a counselor or mental health professional, and we were all able to break out into Zoom rooms and watch videos and talk and share experiences, much like the discussion we're having now, which can be especially healing because those are the opportunities and the spaces where we can actually express a lot of the things we feel on our own to a bunch of other people that may not know or are not aware of how we feel or understand and can relate. I think that is really what bridges the gap between differences, is when we can relate to one another, or we can understand what someone's saying through the human experience, because we all experience things in the scope of sadness, frustration, isolation, and hurt. I think when we can all understand that we've been hurt in some way, shape, or form, and if we can relate to that experience of being sad or isolated or not being understood, then we can validate each other, and that's how we bring ourselves closer. And it feels really great, much to what you were saying before, when you've experienced those conversations where someone has said, this is what has happened to me, and you validated that experience. That leaves an impression on someone. It leaves an impression on me when someone tells me, I understand what you said, and you're totally valid for saying that, and I'm sorry that happened to you. And I think the more we can share how we feel about these topics the more we see that we have in common.
Yeah, I agree with Stephanie. Not to say, hey, you know, we need to have an Asian friend in order for us to stop racism. It's like we need to have conversations with people that we normally don't have conversations with. And in order for us to do that, that would often mean getting out of our comfort zone and having to, again, unlearn preconceived notions of how we perceive certain groups of people. So, like, most of my experiences in getting to meet and getting to know people from the Asian American community started in college. For them, it was most likely the same thing, if not, maybe a little different. If you have those kind of conversations, you're opening to more perspectives between one another, and the cross-cultural interaction is happening. Because at least at that point, you're getting a little bit more information than you had prior to that.
Yeah, I remember 2 years ago, we invited a speaker, Daryl Davis, and it's very similar to what you guys are talking about because I think it goes in an individual level. And he just shared a model of, you know, and his frame is, how can you hate me if you don't know me? If you don't know who Daryl Davis is, he's like a jazz blues musician, and he goes around outside of being a musician to talk to KKK members, and converted many of them to let go of the preconceived notions and their robes based on relationship and friendship, right? Because it's like, you know, and he just has incredible experiences. He's on YouTube, so I highly recommend whoever's watching this, and even in our panel here, to watch it. And that really helped me frame my thinking because, again, Cheyenne knows this. We talked about it. Like, I come from the framework that most of humanity, we're trash. We like to be insular. We like to be comfortable. We like our self-preservation. We like to be in our own frame of thinking. But like you guys said before, we need to get out of our comfortable situations. We have to hear stories and hear people's lives. And that's not just the Black community or the Asian community, but even the Blue community, even police officers. And you know, it's a broad spectrum, and I don't mean one or two conversations because that's so anecdotal, but like multiple conversations and communities coming together to come to a place of humility, to apologize. Like, I remember, you know, having so many conversations, and I'm like, yeah, us Korean people, we're racist. I mean, the truth is, we're prejudiced against even our Asian communities. Like, you know, we want to disassociate with the Chinese community. Like when like I was talking to my parents, and when all the anti-Asian hate happened, I'm like, guys, are you worried? They go, no, they're the Chinese, we're Korean. I'm like, America doesn't see us like that. You know what I mean? And so even within our own communities, there's such pride and prejudice against each other. And if that's not acknowledged, if that's not aware, if we're not in conversations and exposing that, we're not going to have a resolution. But if we take the effort to go outside of that and really build relationships, and you know, that's where my, you know, religious pastor Christian frame comes in. I think that's a great step and the next step, and I think that's what we all can be able to do.
I'll chime in here a little. So kind of like towards the question, right? So I, as like the person that does arts and culture, but also the person that does like art therapy, I have a lot of these conversations because I'm very thankful that I have friends from all around. And I'm also thankful that I've had opportunity through schooling to go and like study in like Hong Kong. I've studied in like mainland China, I've done stuff in Ireland. So I've had the opportunity to be around friends from all over. But so that's helped me kind of put like my world that used to be like kind of like this to just being the whole space that surrounds me, right? And I think to going into spaces, because I've also been on those same places with people who are also still insular, right? They'll go to other countries and be like, oh, why aren't they speaking English here? Because it's not their country's language. Like, what are you talking about, right? There are those types of people. So that's also a reminder as well. Like, if you're going into certain spaces, don't have the expectation that they're supposed to accommodate, right, too? Because I think that's something I'm making the assumption it's an American thing. Maybe it's a white American thing. I'm not sure, where we go into spaces and we're like, oh, do the thing that I know that I'm familiar with, and that's it, right? Why is everybody standing on the other side of the street? Why is the driver's side thing on the outside? How come they don't serve this and this? I'm talking about a Facebook post that I saw that was like really ridiculous, but basically like people traveling and like saying how come things were in a certain way, which made zero sense, right? So with that, having cross-cultural conversations is important, both like amongst yourself as an individual, but also trying to see if you can build that within your own community, right? Because that is also needed. Sometimes, unfortunately, people like to just go to things that are already started. So you have to sometimes start those things yourself, right? That's why we have things like our part 2 for this, right? Part 2 for Black and Asian solidarity. This is not going to be the second time that we talk about this. It'll eventually be 3rd, 4th, 5th, until we don't have to talk about it anymore because we're so solid that everyone knows, that there's solidarity there, right? So the conversations have to keep happening until there really isn't any need to have it happen, except for being like, yeah, right, isn't that so cool that we also have solidarity for each other? And then that's really like where the conversation, ends, right? But also to like understanding or attempting to understand other people's pain, right? And that's something I also, and I think Stephanie can also attribute it to, we went to school together. When it comes down to being a therapist or somebody in the mental health field, where you can never, ever understand somebody's experience wholeheartedly, right? However, you can attempt to understand that their pain is wholeheartedly true, right? And I think that's where we get mixed up sometimes in not understanding each other, because we're like, well, that doesn't happen to me, or well, I've never had that experience with the police, or well, I've never had that experience with this community. It doesn't mean that the experience doesn't exist, right? Just because I can't see outside of the box doesn't mean there's no outside of the box, right? So I think that's also important to think about when it comes to cross culture, like cross racial solidarity and just, cultural competence. We even had a workshop like that in Muslim Sisters Staten Island about a cultural competence, because some of us are very incompetent, right? Some of us are like you were saying, Billy, very insular, where we have tunnel vision, we have, either rose-colored glasses or we have shades on, we can't see anything. And it's a matter of actively choosing, right, to see or attempt to see somebody else's perspective, right? I will never understand Stephanie's perspective wholeheartedly, Sylvia, Miriam, Edward, Billy, or Cheyenne. However, if they tell me something's happening, I'm not going to take it as like, what are you talking about? You're like maybe the second or third person that's told me about this. Does this really happen? Are you really sure about that? Really not taking it lightly, the stories that people tell us about their experiences and the things that happen within their community. Because our communities, yes, we share a lot of things culturally, but it's not just cookie cutter. Right. There's a lot of things that will happen. Right. Even for instance, right, what Billy was talking about with the police. Right. You've had a really great experience with Miriam. Your mom has not had the best experience. Right. But you both come from the Korean community. Prime example there. There's always going to be a different perspective, but both of those experiences are important and they're valid. So that was just my drop in there. Awkward silence. No, I'm kidding.
To add on to this question, just we do have a question from our audience member, which I think is a similar sort of question, but let's see who asked this. Mike asked this. He was saying, what does the panel feel is most needed, either in philosophy or action from other communities, be they Black, Asian, white, or any others, to be a good ally or good allies? I feel like we already have a lot on the table, but if anybody want to chime in with
question.
Some other experiences.
I think it's what Naja had expressed so beautifully. It's the philosophy of understanding and validating someone's story, even if it's not your personal story. Because from personal experience, and I'm sure we all share that, when someone tells you that's not real, you feel terrible and you don't feel like you're able to share your stories, and therefore, referring to our other question, you feel like you have to be silent.
That was a good point. Yeah, I was gonna say, I was about to pick you, Edward. I was about to be like, Edward, you have something you'd like to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess like with it, I guess like since Mike mentioned philosophy, I feel like I'm constantly trying to fight against cynicism, not only within myself, but also within like my friends and people just around me, like people who don't feel comfortable speaking out. I feel like oftentimes are very cynical about not just the political process, but like social movements in general. I've had so many conversations with my friends about like why protests are important, why speaking out is important, and when people are cynical, they kind of go back into themselves and become very selfish, and they feel like the only thing that matters in life is self-protection, and that's, I feel like, breeds in hate and fear, and so I feel like, you know, having these conversations are really helpful. But also for me personally, is just telling people that I am having these conversations and that they are useful. Maybe we're not like changing policy like just from this panel, but we are raising awareness and we are helping each other, supporting each other, and at least letting each other know that we are out there and that people are there that care about these things. I think also looking at history, at how just reflecting on the fact that right now is the best time to be alive as a person of color, because of all the wonderful things that previous movements have accomplished and the lives that they've sacrificed. And all those things do have value and use. And so, yeah, I think being optimistic, but also realistic, I think it's always a difficult balance to strike, but I think it's important.
Well said, man. I don't want to say anything. I rather let everybody else talk. I feel like I talk a lot.
I could say just like randomly, like this is so general but basic, but I know this is something I definitely some of the people in the activism community talk about too. It's just like simply like just love people, like love everyone around us. I think like it's a simple thing. It's like I think it's definitely like doing the things that like you go the extra mile for that random person or random stranger in a way. But honestly, that kind of like that act of compassion and generosity, I think it really goes a long way. And it could really be life-changing for other people too. And if it's like someone like you're from a different kind of community, to love someone else from that different community, it's like I think that could be super radical. And yeah.
Man, okay, all right. I'm gonna say something. All right. So I was trying to wait because I'd be talking. But I was, and I think I'm gonna pass it to Cheyenne after I'm done speaking. I think she wanted to say something before. But the way I think also too, to add on to what Mary was saying, like, you know, to love people is also to recognize that people are humans, you know, and it's not so much of an other, right? Like kind of going back to like, oh, well, that's just the Chinese, like it's not us, right? Like, oh, well, that's just them, it's not us. And it's like, no, it's all of us, right? Because no one is seeing the difference, right? Like when anybody sees myself, Cheyenne, or Stephanie, they're not like, oh, well, you know, you're Dominican and your family's from Jamaica, but no, you're from here. So like, you're fine, right? And they're not going to you guys like, oh, well, you're from Korea, you're from China, you're from Singapore, you're from all these other places, so you know you're good. We get coupled together into groups as having one big representation of you know of our race and stuff. So I think having less of that generalization and having more of realizing that we're all human beings and that we're not some magical creatures that are in human form. You know, we all bleed blood, we're all, you know, gonna die one day, and we're all hopefully going to live you know, a good and fulfilling life, but we need others there to help us achieve that. And also too, just like recognizing or attempting to recognize like those backhanded compliments or like those jokes, right? And, you know, Stephanie, I'll use this as an example because we had a conversation about this where, you know, someone would be like, oh, well, you're looking very Spanish today, or you're looking very Asian today, you're looking very Black today. What does that mean? You know, like what does that mean? I just look like me and I happen to be from this background. Like how am I looking more of this, right? Or just having like the persistent question, like, oh, like where are you from? Where are you really from? Really questioning our existence here, so that kind of standing up against people that do those things towards us is helpful, because sometimes we may not feel like we can fight back. We may not feel like we're in a safe space to do so, whether it be in the workplace, out in the street, you know, at events, different things like that. Having people be allies for us there helps that person who's being bigoted, prejudiced, or racist realize that they are truly the minority in this situation, and that they don't necessarily have as much power as they think that they have or they're trying to gain. So you guys fighting in those small instances, even if it's not going to protests or posting different things, but actively supporting those around you, or just people that you see that's just being mistreated, even if it seems like it's something slight, or, oh, you can't take a joke type of thing, or, oh, I was just asking a simple question. It's like, no, you're being rude. I'm not going to ask you where are you from, and you're going to say I'm from here. Okay, that's my same answer. Like, why is there persistency, right? So that was just my thing. Just like, even in small instances, remember that we're human, and remember that, you know, even the smallest things that you think is not as hurtful can be hurtful, and to stand up for us in those instances as well, not just when there's a giant thing happening. You know, I don't know if anybody else wants to go, please.
I think we're passing to Cheyenne, if you have anything you wanted to add, because I think you got cut off a little bit in the beginning.
So I guess what I would say is it's philosophy and action. So the action is acknowledging that we're a part of a system that pretty much marginalizes non-white people. This is basically a standard. This is the default. This is our standards. And in order for us to do that, we have to, and I'm going to keep saying this, having to unlearn some of the things that we've been accustomed to. Our upbringing is the first thing that we are aware of. This is what we've come to learn. Then secondly, it's what we've learned in the public school, in our circles, and in college, or at work, or anything that we are identified by. Our identities are very different, and we have to come to this extent of removing that sense of othering. Because once you other somebody, that's where you can have the dehumanizing rhetoric. You can have this idea that they're not human. So having that concept of humanizing people, and to remove, like what Stephanie acknowledged, basically what everyone's been saying, like removing the backhanded compliments, challenging the racial jokes, even bystander intervention is a way to actually commit action, basically committing words and action to power. So to become a better ally, or just to be able to support us, is to allow us to basically uplift us in spaces where we're not normally heard. Because you can have all these movements. You can have the women's rights movement. You can have the anti-Asian hate movement, the BLM. You can have so many movements, but there's always going to be a particular rhetoric that's always going to be dominant over the other voices that often are not being heard within their own respective communities and groups. So I guess that's my 2 cents there.
Thank you, Cheyenne. I think we have a lot of good thoughts that are just floating around in this chat right now. And, you know, to respect people's time, and, you know, as we're wrapping up this session, I think I want to go quickly around, and for everyone to say something, either something you're leaving with from this session. It could be a new idea or something that's on your mind, or a resource, something that you would like to share with folks, point them towards. Could be a movie, an event that's coming up, anything you feel that would, you know, help bring a lot of the ideas that we're talking about into action and into our community. So either a takeaway you have, a new idea, or some resource you would like to share, or both. But we're going to go around really quickly and, you know, kind of fire away some of the things that's on your mind. So I'm going to pick someone to go first. Let's see who should go first. Miriam, do you want to start us off, and then you can pass it along?
Okay. Oh man. Okay. I think for definitely the takeaway with this, I think I kind of lost my point of it. Like, but it's just everything here we're talking about. It's really encouraging to just again it's refreshing to just know everyone's here in the same page of just like coming together as a community. I think that's one thing I would definitely say with everyone here. Like, we all have to come together as a community to really, stop all of this like hate around us, and yeah, I think for me too, it's been kind of like hard because I think when you speak about all these kind of things, just to have like equality and everyone to have rights, for some reason it always becomes this like political debate or like something like people don't have like different opinions about it, and they always like comment to me like like, or just like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing this and all that, but I think we're all people, we're all individuals, and I think we have power and we have a voice to speak up. Everyone, like we talked about, everyone has their own different stories, experiences, what we've run through. I think it's so important for us to keep speaking up, talk about our own stories and experiences. Because like who else is gonna say we're the ones we experienced that for ourselves, and no one can tell our own narratives, and if they do, they're gonna kind of twist it up. So I think really we as individuals have power, and whatever we can do with I do art, but like everyone can do different small things, and we talked about here today, like just have conversations, talk about like just share just like some simple things, or just, I think that's what I'm saying, like, or just to be nice to someone, say hi to someone. I think small things like those every single day, what we do interact with people around us, it really can cause changes too. So yeah.
I'll go after Miriam. Actually, no, that's a lie. I'll go last. I dibs on last, but I'm going to choose Stephanie to go next, and Stephanie, you could choose who gets to go. Haha.
Oh no. Okay, so I think the takeaway that I have from this is that we all have a responsibility to take agency over being actively kind, finding information, listening to others, validating people's feelings, even if we don't understand them fully ourselves. Because I think we've all acknowledged that we have access to the internet as we find ourselves here. We all have the resources in our hands to find community and to express these thoughts with like a loudspeaker, say it loudly so that everyone can be drawn in and not feel alone, because I'm sure there are people in their rooms probably feeling lonely because they probably don't maybe have access in their own communities actively to people who have these thoughts as well. So it's our responsibility to continue this conversation. And I choose Cheyenne.
So what I took from this is hosting more of these. So organizing and continuously host more of these so that there are different conversations that are had. That's not like, this is not going to be the end. This is obviously not the first, but this is definitely not the last time that this is going to be a conversation. So I guess my thing is continue to develop these type of spaces so that we can talk. And I'm going to choose Edward.
So like a quote that I keep swimming in my head and I keep in the back of my mind all the time is silence will not protect you. And Audre Lorde said that, and it kind of resonated with me really strongly when I first read her essay, because as instinctually, I'm a people pleaser, and I think culturally the background is to be silent and make people feel comfortable. I feel like my mom once told me the most important thing in life is to make other people feel comfortable, which is not true. These conversations really require to being in an uncomfortable place and making people leave their bubbles and having uncomfortable conversations in a civil way, in a polite way, and recognizing that people are a product of their environments and they hold their beliefs because of how they grew up and where they grew up. And I think going forth, I really want to challenge myself to really be more vocal and I guess lead by example, I guess, in a sense. Not be shy about telling people that I am being involved in these panels and talks, and ask people if they want to be involved as well. Oh, I guess Billy is the last one, so.
I guess I'm the last one. I mean, I shared it before. I think, well, one of my biggest secret is I'm happy to be part of this panel, and I'm very grateful to be with all you, sharing some of shared experiences and also differing experiences. And I think that's what's really beautiful about this, that there can be space where there's differing experiences and perspectives, but coming to respect and understand each other. And I think that's really important right now, where everything is politicized from media, as Edward talked about, and even many of the panelists, or even in our own communities, is breaking our own echo chambers and coming to a space where we intentionally choose reconciliation and healing in its utmost way. And so that's what I want to leave behind to Naja, because she said she wanted to go last or second to last.
I'll go last, and I'll go second to last and let Sylvia go last.
I love that. I just really love this panel. I don't know, there's so much wisdom here, and I think just I'm reminded that one, things can be complicated and hard when it comes to all the histories that pulls us apart. And it's important to acknowledge the difference and the tension, the elephant in the room, and the conflicts that may arise. But at the same time, being optimistic that community can come out of it, and it's this hard work can happen, and it has to happen. But I think it's a good reminder. I like what Edward said of just like not being too cynical, because I think a lot of times that can bog us all down to not want to believe in change. And kind of a shameless plug, but once again, plugging the Upstander training that's coming next Thursday. I think it's between 6 to 8. We have a great trainer there. There are these folks who done work both in international like grassroots movements, but also they did community safety work around like when Black Lives Matter and Twin Cities to help communities equip themselves and just like keep each other safe. So there are going to be really good techniques that's going to be recommended there. So please do share with your network and come through. And it'll be great to see some people in person. It's going to be in a park and socially distant. So that's one way that we can form community. But yeah, I'm going to pass it to Naja to close it all off together.
So thank you again so much to everyone who came. Thank you so much to Sylvia for being a part of us, having Ona and, the Asian American Federation, here with us. So my takeaway idea, whatnot, is to take everything everyone said and try your best to implement it. No, that's the easy way out. No, is to go about the world with kindness and an open mind, and understand that it's okay that you don't understand. And when I say that, not being okay with the fact like, oh, well, I don't understand it, so it's whatever, but meaning that don't be so hard on yourself because you can't fully empathize with someone, is what I mean with not being able to understand. Because at the end of the day, all of our shoes are different sizes, colors. Some of us are wearing heels, some are wearing flats, some of us are wearing sandals, right? We all are wearing different shoes and walking about life at a different pace, slow, fast. I'm limping right now, I hurt my leg. So just understand that everyone is different, but everything that people say can also be just as meaningful as what you have to say. And try to treat people that the way that you want to be treated. And I think that'll help kind of the conversations that you want to have, and to also emphasize to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I'm taking more of Edward's wording and the quote. So all in all, thank you again to our lovely panelists. Thank you again for, Cheyenne and Sylvia for making this happen. I just popped on to help talk. And we will most certainly have a part 3, 4, and 5 until, again, we don't have to talk about this anymore and it just becomes a casual conversation. Like, do you remember when we used to have those conversations on StreamYard and on Live? And people were like, what's going on with solidarity and blah, 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 right? So until that conversation, I don't have these conversations. So look forward, check us out on our social media. we'll be posting, later on in the chat, everyone's social media if you want to link with them, the different activist groups that they're part of, the different organizations that they're part of. So thank you to everyone again, and have a wonderful night and a great weekend. Bye, everybody.